My name is Sarah. I am 31 years old. I work as a teacher in a small town. I live in a peaceful town where everybody knows each other. Life was easy and comfortable. I enjoyed my work. I had wonderful friends. I believed in true love. To me, love meant respect, kindness, and support. Then I met Kevin. Kevin was kind and easy to talk to. One day, he came to my school to help with a local project. He smiled at me and said, "You have a beautiful smile." I smiled back. At that moment, I did not know that my life was about to change. After that day, Kevin started sending me messages. Every morning he wrote, "Good morning, I hope you have a great day." His messages made me happy. I looked forward to hearing from him. He wanted to know everything about me. He asked about my favorite meals, books, hobbies, and future plans. He said, "I feel very connected to you." After a month, we started dating. He took me to the beach and often surprised me with small gifts. One day, he gave me a novel and said, "This book reminds me of you." Little by little, I fell in love with him. I told my friends about Kevin. They said, "He sounds nice, but be careful. Things are moving quickly." Kevin was serious about our relationship. After 6 months, he asked me to marry him while we were walking by the ocean. He stopped walking and said, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled my eyes and I said yes. Our wedding was simple but beautiful. My family was happy, his family was smiling. I wore a white dress. Kevin looked into my eyes and softly said, "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." I believed every word. The first year of marriage was peaceful. We ate meals together, watched movies, and spent time in the park every weekend. Sometimes he surprised me with flowers or a gentle kiss on my cheek. I felt blessed. I thought, this is the life I always wanted. But over time, things slowly changed. Kevin started arriving home late. He never gave clear reasons. He only said, "Work is busy." I trusted him, but he stopped showing interest in my day. When we talked, he rarely looked at me. Deep inside, I felt something was wrong. I tried harder to make him happy. I cooked his favorite meals, cleaned the house, and wore clothes he liked. He never seemed to notice. He always looked tired and distracted. When I asked if he was okay, he replied, "I'm fine, just tired." One evening, I waited for him and cooked his favorite pasta. It was already 9 o'clock when he came home. I smiled and said, "Dinner is ready." He looked at the table and answered, "I already ate." Then he sat down and turned on the television. I sat alone and stared at the food. I no longer felt hungry. A few days later, I noticed a message appear on his phone. It said, "I can't wait to see you again." The number was unknown. I asked, "Who sent this?" Kevin quickly took the phone and said, "Don't touch my phone." I said, "I'm your wife. Why are you hiding things from me?" He stood up and replied, "Stop acting crazy," before leaving the house. That night, I could not sleep. I stared at the ceiling and wondered what I had done wrong. I remembered our wedding day and the way he once looked at me. It felt like that person no longer existed. The next morning, I made coffee for him. He took the cup without a word and continued looking at his phone. I felt empty inside. He used to tell me he loved my smile. Now he barely noticed me. I tried talking to him again. I asked, "Please, tell me what's happening." He answered, "You ask too many questions." Then I asked, "Do you still love me?" He stayed silent. As the weeks passed, our home felt like a hotel. He came and went without talking much. I often cried in the bathroom because I did not want him to see my tears. I wanted answers, not arguments. One weekend, Kevin disappeared for the whole day. He returned late at night, and I smelled perfume on his shirt. It was not my perfume. I looked at him and asked, "Are you seeing another woman?" He did not get angry or surprised. He simply said, "That's none of your business." My heart felt shattered. I told my best friend Hanna everything. She listened carefully and said, "You gave him love, but he gave you silence." Crying, I asked, "Why did he marry me if he didn't love me?" Hanna replied, "Some people want comfort more than love. You were kind, and he liked that." I thought about her words for many days. Was I only someone who made life easier for him? Was I just filling an empty space in his life? I looked at our wedding pictures again. I remembered how proud I felt to be Kevin's wife. Now I only felt disappointment. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. My face looked tired. My eyes were full of sadness. I could not remember the last time I smiled naturally. One morning, Kevin left his phone at home. I had no intention of checking it, but the screen suddenly lit up. A photo appeared. It was a woman holding a glass and smiling. Under the photo, a message said, "Wish you were here." My hands started shaking. I sat down and looked through some of the messages. One message from Kevin said, "You make me feel happy." Another said, "I feel alive when I'm with you." Reading those words made me feel sick. Later that day, Kevin came home. He saw his phone on the table and immediately looked at me. "Did you read my messages?" he asked. I quietly answered, "I saw enough." He did not apologize. He simply said, "Well, now you know." I looked at him and asked, "Why did you marry me?" He shrugged his shoulders and replied, "You were nice. It felt right at the time." Those words hurt me more than the cheating itself. That night, I packed a small bag and left. I went to Hannah's house. When she opened the door, she hugged me tightly. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. I was not ready to move on. I was not ready to be happy again. But I knew I could not continue living that way. I stayed at Hanna's house for a few days. She gave me a comfortable room, clean towels, and warm tea every evening. She never pushed me to talk. She simply said, "Take your time. You don't have to explain everything right now." At night, I lay awake and remembered the happy moments Kevin and I once shared. I thought about the notes he used to write for me and the promises he once made. I wondered if any of them had ever been real. On the third morning, I called my workplace and asked for some time off. My voice was shaking, but my manager was understanding. "Take as much time as you need," she said kindly. After the call, I sat in the kitchen with Hanna. Hanna asked, "What are you going to do now?" I slowly shook my head and replied, "I honestly don't know." She looked at me and said, "You don't have to figure everything out today, but remember, you are not the one who lied." Her words gave me strength. That afternoon, I returned to the house while Kevin was at work. As I walked through the rooms, everything felt different. The house that once felt warm now felt cold and empty. I packed my clothes, books, and favorite mug. Then I removed my wedding ring and left it on the table. Beside the ring, I left a short note. It said, "You broke something that was given to you with love. One day, I hope you understand what that means." That evening, I cried again, but the tears felt different. They came from acceptance, not confusion. I stayed with Hanna for a month. During that time, I read books, took long walks, and spent quiet afternoons by the window. Slowly, life began to feel calmer. Every day, I felt a little stronger than the day before. One morning, Hanna smiled and said, "Let's go out for lunch." At first, I refused, but she convinced me. We visited a small cafe near a lake. The atmosphere was peaceful, and people sat quietly reading books and drinking coffee. While we waited for our food, a man walked in. He looked around my age and greeted the waiter with a smile. He sat at the table next to us and opened a notebook. A few minutes later, he asked the waiter for extra honey with his tea. Then he laughed and said, "My mother always says honey helps heal a tired heart." Without meaning to, I smiled. He noticed my smile and politely asked, "Did I say something funny?" I replied, "No, my mother used to say the same thing." He smiled warmly. "Mothers usually know best," he said. His name was Junior, and he spent most afternoons writing in that cafe. Over the next few weeks, I returned to the cafe many times. Sometimes Junior was there, and we would talk for a while. One day, he asked what I did for a living. When I told him I was a teacher, he smiled and said, "Helping people learn is a wonderful job." I laughed and replied, "Sometimes I feel like I'm still learning myself." Junior looked at me and said, "Maybe that's what life is about." One afternoon, he asked if he could walk me home. I agreed. We talked about simple things and enjoyed the fresh air. I liked the way he walked beside me. He never rushed ahead or tried to lead. He simply walked next to me. When we arrived at Hanna's house, he smiled and said, "Thank you for spending time with me today." I thanked him for his kindness. That night, I thought about Kevin for the first time in several days. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled me. It felt smaller and farther away. A few days later, I went to visit my parents. I had not told them the whole story. I only said that Kevin and I were spending some time apart. My mother hugged me tightly when I arrived. My father made coffee and said, "You can stay here whenever you need." I knew they were worried about me, but they respected my privacy and did not force me to explain everything. That evening, I sat outside with my mother. The sky was filled with orange and pink colors from the sunset. She gently held my hand and asked, "Are you safe?" I nodded and replied, "Yes, I'm hurt, but I'm safe." She smiled softly and said, "That's the most important thing." When I returned to Hanna's house, I started writing again. Before my marriage, I loved writing poems and short stories. Somehow, I had stopped doing those things. Maybe I became too busy. Maybe I forgot who I was. Now, every morning, I wrote something. Sometimes it was only a few sentences, but it helped me feel alive again. Junior continued visiting the cafe. Sometimes he shared a funny story or brought me a small flower. We became good friends, nothing more, but his friendship felt comfortable and safe. One afternoon, Junior looked at me and said, "You are stronger than you think." His words stayed with me. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and saw something different. I still looked tired, but I also saw courage. I saw a woman who had walked away from pain. One morning, I opened my email and saw a message from Kevin. It only said, "Can we talk?" There was no apology, no explanation, just those 3 words. I stared at the message for a long time. I felt many emotions, but I did not know what to do. After 2 days, I finally replied, "What do you want to say?" A few minutes later, he answered, "I miss you. I made a mistake." Months earlier, those words would have broken my heart. Now they felt empty and meaningless. I closed the email and decided not to continue the conversation. That weekend, I visited my sister. She had 2 young children who ran toward me shouting, "Auntie Sarah!" I hugged them and laughed. Their happiness reminded me that love could still be simple and pure. My sister smiled and said, "You look happier now." I thought for a moment and replied, "Maybe I am." On the way home, I thought about everything that had happened. I remembered the lies, the silence, and the loneliness. I used to blame myself for the problems in my marriage. I always asked what I had done wrong. But now I understood the truth. Kevin did not love me the way I loved him. He enjoyed the comfort I gave him, but he never truly cared for my heart. For the first time, I stopped feeling ashamed. I realized that his choices were not my fault. A few days later, Junior and I sat together at the cafe. The trees moved gently in the wind outside. He looked at me and asked, "Do you think you will ever fall in love again?" I thought carefully before answering. Then I smiled and said, "Maybe one day. But first, I want to learn how to love myself." Junior nodded and said, "That sounds like a wise decision." We spent hours talking about books, travel, food, and dreams. For the first time in a long while, I laughed from my heart. Over the next few months, I slowly built a new life for myself. I moved into a small apartment near the school. It was not a large apartment, but it was bright and peaceful. Every morning, sunlight filled the rooms. I decorated it with family photos, books, and little things that made me happy. One evening, I found an old wedding photograph in a box. I looked at it quietly for a few moments. I did not cry. I did not feel angry. I simply felt finished with that chapter of my life. I placed the photo back in the box and closed the lid. Then I moved forward. At school, one student noticed that I no longer wore a wedding ring. She asked me why. I smiled and said, "Sometimes the wrong ring must come off before the right future can begin." Today, I know that healing takes time. It is not easy, but it is possible. I am stronger than I once believed. My name is Sarah. I am 31 years old. I walked away from someone who did not truly love me, and I am proud of the person I have become.